folks on Zoom as well, and those who've come Aotearoa. It's just a real pleasure to introduce to you today Rayne, who I have worked with for a wee while now. That's awesome to not have background noise. Great, thank you. So Aisling did a PhD in genomics and conservation at the University of Canterbury with Associate Professor Tammy, Steeves, who will also be speaking today, but through the Zoom link. And Aisling is now coming to the end of a 6-month research fellowship with Te Pūnaha Matatini and also at the Centre of Sustainability. So we've been incredibly lucky to have you, Aisling, and thank you for coming and being part of the centre for even this brief 6 months. And so Aisling has been occupying that very interesting interdisciplinary space between conservation, genomics and social sciences, because in order for conservation to actually be effective, it requires working with communities and with hapu and iwi, and that has turned out to be an incredibly productive and good space for you, I guess, which is fantastic. So she's been working in partnership with Ngāi Tahu Whānui, and particularly to contribute towards the recovery of freshwater species, the koura. And she's also an early career co-lead in the Biological Heritage Challenge. But the other good news is that Aisling now is moving from being a postdoc to having a job at the Cawthron Institute. So science, which is super exciting. And I'm also going to introduce you to Tammy now, although I think she's going to speak a bit later. So kia ora, Tammy. Tammy, as I mentioned, is an associate professor at the University of Canterbury. So she co-leads the conservation, systematics and evolution research team there, but also she's one of our leads at Te Pūnaha Matatini in the Centre of Research Excellence in Complex Systems, because in part she has this, she leads this transdisciplinary kindness and science team. And as well as being the incoming lead for one of our communities of inquiry, which is in research excellence. So Tammy's passionate about many things, including doing her part to rebuild a just research system. And I know that that's something that's very dear to a lot of our hearts as well. So we're looking to rebuild a system that centres people and relationships. And she's got, and is laser focused on fostering a sense of belonging. And so when Tammy says laser focused, you can be sure that she means that, so that everyone in the research system can thrive. So I'm going to shut up now, apart from just saying what a pleasure it is to work with both Aisling and Tammy. And I'm excited to hear what you've both got to say. So kia ora tātou.
Kia ora, Sella. Kia ora tātou. Thank you so much for such a kind introduction. Thank you all for taking the time to listen in today. Thank you. I'm just going to start the presentation. Give me one moment. All right. Before I begin, I want to especially acknowledge mana whenua he mihi nui. Kia waitaha kāti mā moe a Ngāi Tahu. And thank you again for joining us. I am actually going to give a brief introduction to myself and then hand off to Tammy to take on the first half of the presentation. But just briefly. Who am I? I'm a Pākehā or tangata tiriti researcher with mostly English and Irish heritage. I grew up on a dairy farm in Canterbury and have spent most of my life in various parts of Te Pūnaha. I'm a conservation geneticist by training, as Silla said, but found that I enjoyed the intersections of people and the environment and the science more so than the genetics part of it specifically. So I have since migrated into the social sciences. And I'll now pass on to Tammy to introduce herself.
Good, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Fantastic. So who am I? I'm a Canadian Pakeha, also a tangata tiriti researcher with Irish, English, Scottish, and German ancestry. I grew up in two places, one that had me camping at the base of the Three Sisters mountain range and canoeing on the Bow River with my dad in Western Canada, and the other that saw me swimming in Bucktoosh Bay with my extended family and riding my cousin's horses near Shediac in Eastern Canada. I moved to Otautahi Christchurch in 2006 on a insert postdoctoral fellowship, and well, I never left. Kia ora. And I will say that the internet is a bit dodgy here at the university. So this is why you get, for those of you on Zoom, kia ora, why I'm a talking head. But I will show my face during the Q&A for sure. So I think we'll just lead off to the beginning of our conversation about kindness in science. Thank you very much, Aisling. So kindness. I'd like to invite you now to close your eyes for a moment and think about the word and what it might mean to you in the context of kindness in science. As you open your eyes, I'd also like to ask you if you're surprised that when we speak about embedding kindness in science, we frequently hear retorts like this. Well, but not at the stake of scientific rigor. Or, but what about constructive criticism and honest critique? Or, well, I really like the idea of a just science system that's accessible, inclusive, and equitable. And I agree that a diverse science community is going to lead to enable better science outcomes. But you have to use the word kindness. It's so soft. So now, drawing on one of my favorite movies that immediately dates me, The Princess Bride, kindness, that word, I do not think it means what you think it means. Kindness is not niceness, where niceness conforms and is relatively easy. Kindness confronts and is often far from it. So as our colleague in the Kindness in Science Collective, Dr. Jamie Aotearoa, has said, the term kindness in science should not be perceived as a threat to the robustness of the scientific method. I might just get you to bring it up, Aisling, if you can flick it, please. Thank you.
You're just having some challenges with the...
You can just arrow, you can just right arrow on the
Right arrow.
Spacebar. Oh, there you go.
It wouldn't be a hybrid presentation without at least one glitch, right? So we might as well get it out early. So as I was saying, as our colleague in the Kindness in Science Collective, Dr. Jamie Aotearoa, has said, the term kindness in science should not be perceived as a threat to the robustness of the scientific method, but rather a commitment to improving pathways to, careers within, and improved outcomes of society as a whole. So for us here in Aotearoa, kindness in science is very much a living definition. It's currently defined as a fierce commitment to deliberate and sustained action to build a just science system that is accessible, inclusive, and equitable. But we are in the midst of revisiting this definition, informed by our transdisciplinary team, whose expertise includes social psychology, feminist geography, and moral and political philosophy. Now, the precedent for kindness is glaring. The science system has been described as one that enables exclusion, hyper-individualism, and injustice. And these themes quickly become evident in so much of the recent work here in Aotearoa that aims to interrogate the current science system. But before I go further, I'm keen to highlight that our working definition of the science community includes all those that contribute to the science system, from early career people to senior academics, researchers, and professionals across our research institutions, as well as diverse knowledge holders, including iwi, hapu, whānau, local communities, science communicators, philosophers, librarians, historians, and policymakers. Now, returning to Jamie's perspective on improving science pathways, careers, and outcomes, here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, the Kindness in Science Collective argues that the best science cannot be delivered in power structures that favor cutthroat empire builders. Rather, the best science will come from a just system that is accessible, equitable, and inclusive, and one that rewards diverse science collectives. But for some, the jury is still out. For example, 2 articles in this same issue of Nature recently addressed diversity in science. The news feature, featured on the left, whose target audience is generally early career researchers, reads, "Being inclusive gives research groups a competitive edge. It also happens to be the right thing to do." I'd also like just to mihi to Associate Professor Anne-Marie Jackson, who is featured here in this article. Whereas the editorial, whose target audience is generally mid to late career researchers, reads, "Improving participation of underrepresented groups is not just fair, it could produce better research." So of course, the emphasis on could is my own. So there's a lot that can be said about this, but in the interest of time, let's assume the evidence is in, it's compelling, and we're ready to take the plunge. But what will it take to make our science institutions, including our universities, our cores, our CRIs, our IROs, more diverse? What will it take to change the culture of science? In a few words, we need to build a new science table, one where everyone can see themselves, not just surviving, but thriving. In other words, rebuilding a science table will not be achieved by any one singular action, but rather it will require a myriad of deliberate and sustained actions across all levels of the science system, including individuals, institutions, and the system itself. So at this stage, just to give you a little bit of an idea of what we're talking about when we think about individual, institutional, and systemic kindness, I'm going to use a few examples, just of my own personal examples, which I can speak to. So as Scylla mentioned earlier, I have the privilege of co-leading the concert team. My co-lead and I have deliberately shifted away from a hierarchical system towards one that demonstrates mutual respect and implies an ethic of care. It's absolutely influenced by Tuakana Tene concepts where everyone has something to contribute and to learn from one another. We're also all a little bit weird, and we're totally okay with that. Now, in terms of institutional kindness, again, I'll speak to my own home institution. In an effort to give effect to Te Tiriti o Waitangi, building on the exceptional work of so many on campus, including the dedicated and talented staff in Te Waka Pakano, the Office of Māori Pacific and Equity, the University of Canterbury recently established an Office of Treaty Partnership, which has created a tangible space to co-develop a partnership agreement between UC and Mana Whenua, Ngāi Tuariri, that will provide strong Māori academic and professional leadership on a pan-university basis. It is, however, early days. While I am delighted by the deliberate steps taken by the university's leadership, as someone privileged to mentor undergraduate and postgraduate Māori students over the years, I can hand on heart say that institutional racism and everyday racism are very much part of their experience here. And there is much work to be done by many across campus to co-create a university where marginalized students, including Māori students, can genuinely see themselves. But to make the greatest gains, what we really need to do across the science system is invest, and by this we mean invest time, energy, and funds in those deliberate and sustained actions that will embed kindness to transform the science system. Now, there are so many exceptional leaders in this space dedicated to transformative change that it would be remiss of me to single out a mere few. Instead, I point to the opportunities that are being provided by Te Ara Pairangi, which for anyone who isn't familiar is a government-initiated multi-year program on the future of our national research, science, and innovation system. So until recently, it would be at this point of the talk that I would encourage each of you to consider the levers available to you and to choose the one or few that you can pull within your own spheres of influence, if not now, then tomorrow or a year from now, to better enable kindness to be embedded in a science system. But as you'll learn from Aisling in a moment, we're beginning to integrate complexity theory into our thinking, and to achieve the best outcomes and to avoid the most perverse ones, it is clear that these efforts will need to be coordinated. Kia ora.
Cheers, Tammy. So in the past 6 months, we've been actively considering what our levers might look like through a lens of kindness and science. And the timing of this work, as Tammy mentioned, has been very serendipitous, given that Te Aotearoa presents us with a unique opportunity to critically engage with and apply kindness and science at a systemic level. But first, who is kindness and science? At this point in time, it represents a growing and very multifaceted community, including several aligned initiatives or projects. These include the Kindness and Science Collective, a community of people focused on leading a culture shift in the science community, one that embeds kindness to achieve better outcomes. While the collective is predominantly based here in Aotearoa, some are now overseas, including co-founders of the collective, Stephanie Gala over in the US, and Catherine Fabria now over in Canada. And to date, there have been 2 workshops run for and by the collective. One of the outcomes of the first workshop in 2017 was the explicit need for tools for embedding kindness, particularly at a systemic level. Our most recent workshop last year, which was hosted by Te Pūnaha Matatini, focused on what those tools could look like, and particularly how they might be co-developed and shared. To that end, we're currently developing the Kindness and Science Wiki, which will act as, along with an updated website and listserv, and this will provide a community or a way of keeping the community connected and a way of sharing ideas, tools, and resources. The development of these platforms has been primarily led by Alexandra Pavlik over at Manaki Whenua and a member of the Kindness and Science Collective. Alongside this, we have the Te Pūnaha Matatini or TPM Kindness and Science project. And this project is a multi-year mixed methods program that includes a full-time PhD student, Bethany Cox, myself as a 6-month research fellow, which I'm coming to the end of, and a very interdisciplinary team of advisors or investigators, and that includes Tammy, Emma Sharp, Lilani Walker, Zilla, Sean Hendy, and Anna Matheson. And our aim here is to interrogate and challenge the landscape of Aotearoa's research, science, and innovation system. TPM also has 3 communities of inquiry, or COIs, including the Culture of Research Excellence, led by philosopher Kushu Watini. With all of these different facets coming together, we're really hopeful that we can contribute toward a genuine culture shift in Aotearoa's research system. But of course, we can only focus on a few steps at a time. So our next stages within the kindness and science space are 8 sort of core facets, which I'll just talk through briefly. And so we've recently come to the realization that it's time for some critical reflection and workshopping to co-identify our vision, mission, and values, or as Lilani Walker put it, to identify our centre and our boundaries. To that end, we're organising a strategic planning workshop to bring everyone together and work through all of these ideas. And we anticipate that this thinking will inform and be informed by the Kindness and Science manuscript and upcoming spin-off article, which will articulate those values and aspirations and provide a clear definition of kindness as we see it and the communities that we're speaking to. We're focusing on TPM as a case study of a research community that actively practices kindness. And this case study includes an online survey followed by interviews to enable reflexive thematic analysis and social network analysis. An aligned paper from a recent International Feminist Geography Conference is considering the practices and self-naming of allyship through a lens of care. For example, how do we transform academic institutions not only by fostering care among individuals, but to offer the means for collectives of carers to work under less resistance. We're also thinking about where kindness and science sits within a global context. And this dovetails really nicely with, connects to the eLife community, which primarily focuses on supporting early career researchers from the eLife to drive change in the global research community. And so we're really fortunate to have a series of 3 workshops with the eLife ambassadors and champions last week. I think last week and to have a conversation around kindness in science. And beyond just being incredibly interesting conversations with these researchers, it really highlighted the differences and the scale of the challenges that people are facing in different areas of the world. Alex is also leading the revamping of the website and the wiki, as well as the listserv, and we're also engaging with NBIE through a series of conversations around Te Arapairangi. Given the recent events relating to sexual misconduct at a New Zealand university, we'll be prioritising the establishment of a national professional board for all researchers that upholds tikanga and ethical behaviour in research spaces outlined in TPM submission on the Green Paper. And within there, we've also got a hot topic coming out for the New Zealand Ecological Society, or being developed, on kindness and peer review. By way of example, I'd like to highlight some work from within the Kindness and Science project. In TPM submission to Te Arapairangi Green Paper, we were interested in showing that, despite systemic barriers, that the research landscape has begun to slowly change from one of hyper-individualism toward more collective approaches. So we use Scopus to collate any journal articles that include Te Pūnaha Matatini as an affiliation, and by looking at the co-authorship network and how it changed over periods of time within TPM, we were able to find some evidence for a shift toward a more connected research landscape, at least within TPM. And for example, this co-authorship network here indicates that there are more connections between more and more diverse research teams in mid to later years. But we also understand that co-authorship networks alone will not capture all of the relationships or communities or provide an adequate assessment of impact. So in collaboration with the Culture of Research Excellence CRI, the Kindness and Science project will be building an even more comprehensive picture of the research landscape that includes both quantitative and qualitative data through the case study that I mentioned earlier. And in doing so, we're hoping to capture a more holistic picture of TPM's impact as a connected, resilient and adaptive community that privileges tikanga, centres people and relationships, realises intersectional diversity through access, equity and inclusion, and that fosters inter and transdisciplinary research. So where our journey has led us to so far is toward opportunities to extend complexity theory to the research system, to think about how we can possibly build such a complex system anew. This figure on the slide is from TPM's Green Paper submission. It speaks to Te Kawo Maro, a military strategy of Maniapoto. So when birds such as the kawa or cormorant flock together in flights, they ease their collective journey by moving from individuals into an ordered state. The flock that emerges and its critical features such as feedback loops, emergence and phase transitions are an example of a complex adaptive system. Within Kindness and Science, we are particularly interested in drawing from public health and policy systems research, for example, the work led by Anna Matheson at TPM to extend complexity theory to the national research system through a lens or an ethic of care. For example, we're keen to use our case study with TPM to identify critical features of the research system and to explore how kindness might be defined as one of its properties. We hope that a careful application of complexity theory to the research system will bring attention to the policies and practices and relationships that enable or disenable accessibility, inclusivity and equity, and that it will identify collective action for transforming the research system. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, we still need to come back to our definitions, our values and our mission. And this is where we're focused in the short to medium term. And we're really excited to see where we end up. We also understand that many other people and communities are thinking very deeply about the future of the research system at the moment. And so we're keen to end this talk with a question for the audience. Have any aspects of Kindness and Science resonated with you? We'd love to hear your thoughts. And with that, I will thank everyone involved and thank you all for listening. Kia ora.
Well, thank you, Ashley. I always love seeing other people's brilliant slides too. And thank you, Tammy, as well. Are there any questions from the audience?
I've got a question, well, a sort of a comment and a question. So I'm involved in a core as well, Fate Core, and I'm one of the associate directors, and part of the role has been supporting a new kind of emphasis on equity, diversity and inclusion. It's been quite hard. It's actually been really hard. I haven't been leading the group, but I've been observing it, and it's been very difficult. And I just wondered, how do you try and get representativeness to those sorts of groups? Because what we found is a lot of women step forward for those kinds of roles, and it's actually a diversity committee with only women on it. So we're missing, you know, the conversation. So how do you do that better?
It sounds so familiar. It's pretty funny, really. Ashley, do you want to answer that? I'm going to leave you and Tammy to have the floor. I can put my 2 cents worth in if you like, but actually this is your talk, so do feel free to go for it.
As part of the team, I think it would be awesome to hear your thoughts too, Scylla. That's a really fantastic question, and like sort of Scylla, it's just mentioned, it's something that we've been thinking about a bit as well, because you might have noticed on the slide that within kindness and science, it's very much, there's a lot of women on our team as well, and so you know, whether that reflects that this kind of thinking and focus on equity and accessibility, inclusion and justice within the system often falls to women, I think is an interesting question. As far as answers to that, I'm not sure we have a solution or answer as such to that question, rather than it's we need to be really thoughtful around how we make sure that the burden of this kind of work is shared in equitable ways, and that there are, I think, clear pathways for people who maybe don't see themselves within these kind of groups or within kindness and science, that there are clear pathways for them to enter into the group as well.
It's almost there are 2 issues. So you have lots of women putting themselves into those roles because they want to, and it feels good to do that work. But then is there a sort of another challenge that the men then feel quite excluded in terms of trying to join a committee like that? Is there some sort of reverse gender thing going on here where men actually feel excluded in those spaces? That's sort of the sense I'm getting from our efforts to do this one.
I'm just thinking, I'm wondering if we can put Tammy on big.
On big?
Is that possible? Because I'm sure Tammy would probably have something to say. I mean, actually, Carolyn, I would go back to the foundation. So one of the things that we do is we create a foundation right across the organisation where our values are clearly articulated. And what that means is that we ask everybody to step up. And so it's quite clear to all our investigators and whānau that we have particular values, and I think people come to TPM because they actually support those values, and that means that people are more likely to step up from different backgrounds or to want to be involved. But I think it's a much broader foundation of expectation that we're drawing from. So we don't generally have people in TPM who sit back and go, I'm going to leave that work to others. It's much more like if people can contribute, then they will. But having said that, I think it is important to have multiple voices even within a collective, because people hear different voices and respond to different voices. And so I think having one spokesperson is not actually a productive way often. But anyway, Tammy, this is your...
Oh my gosh, am I like a giant head in that room? That's really scary. Apologies, everyone, for that. I think probably all that I would add is reflecting on when we had our first workshop back in 2017, and then also our most recent workshop, we spent a lot of time and energy thinking about who we were shoulder tapping and who we were reaching out to in that establishment phase. And we do spend a lot of time looking around the room. So for example, the COI, or the Community of Inquiry for Research Excellence, it's currently Chrishell and myself. And so we are looking for another lead in that space. And I would think that gender will play a role in that. And so, but I also think part of it is patience, because we're looking to create a safe place for these conversations. And for some early career researchers, or even mid-career or senior researchers who are not used to talking in this way, we need to be patient for them to come to that idea, I think, as well, because you can't make people drink, you can't do those things, but you can create a place where those voices are welcome and they feel heard. Having said that, you cannot underestimate the value of having senior academics and professional staff that happen to identify as being men actually champion what it is that you're doing, and that again enables, I think, more early career researchers that are also men actually to see themselves in this space. But it's not, oh my gosh, it's not an easy question at all, but it's a bit of patience, I think, as we all come through the system. Kia ora.
First, wouldn't that be a consequence of just more women graduating universities now than before? That you have like more female coming up through the ranks. Ottawa, I think it's now 70% women, 30% men in university, and I think similar pattern is evident in like most Western universities at least. So wouldn't that be a consequence that okay, you'll have more women are studying than before? First is that, and second, the idea of inclusivity applies like diversity here is quite nice, but I always wonder like what would you consider inclusive and what would you consider diverse, and where do you put the priority? For example, me as a guy coming from a third world country, am I less privileged than her as a woman coming from a first world country? And that's just saying, okay, based on your country, you are privileged. I don't know. Maybe I come from a very rich family from above, right? So just saying, okay, you are from this color, this country, this race, and that's why your voice is different. That idea, I find it a bit troubling. Although that's probably the easier way to do it, because, well, less people from, let's say, the south, Nepal, so it's the easier way. But as we go on and it becomes more complex and complex, I think there might be a broader discussion on what we say is diverse or what we say is inclusive, not just based on your gender, your country, your race. Just doing that.
Thanks for those thoughts. They're really interesting points. I think just to start with your second point, I think when we're thinking in the space within the kindness and science team, what we're not thinking about is, I guess, in a way, metricizing or trying to assign identities and compare them against one another, but thinking about creating a space or a system where everyone feels like they belong or can develop a sense of belonging. And I think in thinking about that, sometimes the metrics that we use to look at diversity and equity and inclusion don't capture the whole picture. And in part, that's why it's really important to capture people's experiences within the system through more qualitative approaches too, for example, and to, I suppose, think about how you might recognize intersections of all of those different identities and focus on things that bring everyone to the table and make sure that everyone has an equal seat at the table, rather than trying to, I guess, stack different identities or challenges against one another. But I'm keen to hear Tammy's thoughts on that too. And then just to your first point as well, very keen for your thoughts, Rayne. I'm not too familiar with the numbers coming through, but my hunch is that folks in the highest leaderships, almost powerful positions at universities are probably still generally white, cis heterosexual men, and that those folks with the most power are the people that have the most levers at hand, and they're the people that we need most to be coming into these conversations and really thinking about equity and diversity and inclusion. And so even if there's more people coming up through the bottom, that's going to take a lot of time for those people to move through into places where they can really start pulling on those structural levers. But can feel your thoughts too.
I was going to say, comments from the audience, clearly. Caroline, did you have something?
You've just nailed exactly what I was going to say before the next section. Yeah, I mean, I think it's great news that we've got more women through the system, but it's going to take a couple of decades probably, or at least 10 years to see them rise up to the decision-making level, but more so than they are now.
I would just add to that as and reiterate the thankfulness I feel that you're rising, that the organisations rising to the challenge. The comment I was going to make is that you're not alone in this, and there's a sort of a systemic change happening through. I'm aware that the New Zealand Police have a specific training facility at Carrington, Auckland now, that is focused on diversity and getting greater diversity, and particularly around ethnic and also sexual and gender minorities into the police force, and training them in such a way that it almost circumvents the training culture, where that culture is so ingrained. And they're also looking, I know their time frame that they're working on is once again a decade and a half, 2 decades. So that systemic grassroots up culture change is difficult, and it is, as can be said, a matter of patience. And look, once it's successful, the people come. You know, I know that sounds terrible, but it's the truth of it.
Tammy, did you have a comment?
I'm just finding it a little bit hard to hear the entirety of that. I'm curious what the last part of it was in terms of the honest truth. I missed that part of the sentence.
Oh, I just see that once it's sort of shown that this methodology and the inclusion of kindness is successful, the men will come. It's horrible to say, but it's just the way that typically operates.
I think I totoko everything you're absolutely saying in terms of the entire conversation that we've had so far, but I also think we have an opportunity to reimagine our power structures, because when we think about those who are decision makers and who holds the authority to make those decisions, it is a pyramid scheme, right? And so there are changes that we can make both in individual and institutional and systemic levels that can actually change, that can shift that power and think about creating more of an intergenerational space. And I think those are where we might see some of the greatest gains more quickly. Not that I'm even remotely delusional and think this is going to happen very quickly, but I think we really do have to tackle the power structure and that imbalance across the science system if we really, really want to see it shift. And I think part of what we've talked about, I don't really want to get too gendered in this conversation because it really is about intersectionality. And personally, I feel like a lot of our conversations in this space have been very much putting people in boxes. And yet when you talk to people in the science system, they don't see their identity as one that fully sits in a box, or many don't. And oh gosh, I had a thought and now I think I've lost it. No, I think I've lost it. So I'm going to stop talking now. It'll come back to me. I can't see hands, but I'm guessing there's hands. So I'll stop talking.
Aisling, have you got questions on the chat, or would you like to invite Zoom people to ask questions?
Yes, Zoom people, please do put in questions and comments. We've got one here from Nancy saying, in addition to power, it's the reward system that really needs to be changed. Yeah, and I need to talk.
I'm wondering, Nancy, you might want to speak to your question. I'm wondering, by the reward system, do you mean the way, for example, that researchers are assessed in what we might think of as being quite a competitive way, rather than acknowledging relationships, for example, or partnerships? I don't know whether you'd like to speak to that, Nancy.
Yeah, I wish I had answers, but one thing we could do is get rid of PBRF, for example. Ha ha ha, I know, I'm not delusional either. But until we're promoted, until, you know, we're 40-40-20. And I mean, I think Tammy's absolutely right. It's a pyramid scheme, and it's a reward system for people who focus on themselves and their own career. And we don't get brownie points for kindness. It makes us feel good. Some of us know it's the right thing to do, and we do it, but it's not, there's no reward built into the system for that. And so as long as people are extrinsically motivated, and the system has got to change, the reward system has got to change. So instead of 40-40-20, with 20 being service, I bet a lot of people in that room, I can't see who's in the room, but I bet a lot of people in that room are doing a hell of a lot more than 20% in their service capacity. And yeah, I don't have answers. I just have a lot of questions and challenges, I suppose.
Okay, Aisling or Tammy, do you have any thoughts about the issue Nancy's raised?
Yeah, absolutely, Nancy. It's such a good question. And I think this is part of maybe some of the aspirations that we have for the Wiki, because there are good people doing good things, you know, both here in Aotearoa, but also overseas. There's an initiative called DORA, and it is specifically focused on assessment and rewriting how we actually assess excellence for individuals or programs. And some of those resources have recently been adopted, for example, into NSERC, which is effectively Marsden in Canada. And those criteria include all of those kindness things that we do as service. So we can think about how that reward system, whether that happens to be promotion or whether that happens to be an externally funded grant or awards, to what extent we actually embed some of those resources. And you can see similar things that have come through Athena Swan, for example. I know it was considered in Aotearoa back in the day and was dismissed. But something we've been following within the project is actually the Canadian version of Athena Swan, which is now called Dimensions, because essentially what the country did was to say there's a lot of good things in this UK initiative, but we need to adapt this initiative to the Canadian context. So I think there's a lot of global resource that we can consider and connect, and then adapt. And then there's also things we can lead on within Aotearoa as well. And so when I get a sec, I can drop in that link to look at those new criteria. And even I can think about one of the examples I use sometimes is in the last round for cores. There were 3 new criteria added, and 2 related to Māori and Pacific researchers. And there are direct line items that the Centers of Research Excellence have to actually respond to, in the extent to which they are actively incorporating Māori and Pacific researchers, and to the extent to which that research being conducted by them is being captured across the core. And what I saw personally is I was invited to give a talk on kindness and science to the Morris Wilkins Center recently. And it was really interesting because it was right after the rebid, and it was clearly a core that was looking to redefine its center because it had not considered those things previously. And I'm like, that's an external driver that basically said, you're not going to get that money unless you create change. And so whereas I'm completely biased, but when we look at Te Pūnaha Matatini, we had already been doing a lot of those things, not perfectly, lots of room for improvement, but it was not a scary thing to respond to that call. And so you've kind of got your early adopters and your, reluctant comers to the kind of the table. But I think what we kind of envision is that there's lots of resources out there, and we just want to connect people to them, because different opportunities and resources identify to different circumstances. I think kind of a bit waffly, but I'm happy to provide some links afterwards.
Yeah, thank you for that. I do have one thing, and then I'll shut up. But in terms of an external resource, I have a colleague at the Open University in the UK, Rick Holloman. It's Hollliman, and he got promoted. He was possibly the first person there to get promoted as a professor of engaged research, meaning working with the community. And that's a good, and one of the things he's done, and he went and consulted at Oxford and Cambridge, a bunch of other places in the UK, maybe in Europe, I don't remember, about things that can get built into the promotion system of community work. So there's, it's tangential, but it's related to the kind of things that you're doing. So there may be some criteria that they've already developed, because this was back in maybe 2016, I think, when I was, yeah. So there are some things out there that have been incorporated into some systems, like you said, and that might be one place to have a look. Kia ora.
Awesome, thank you.
And just to add, actually, MV is continuing its consultation for the next year as well, for those people who want to do that. Aisling, do you have any comments?
No, I think just to echo that there's definitely interest and desire to shift that reward system, and that there are really good examples that we can look to. And I'm even just thinking of, for example, I think NBIE recently sent out a new narrative CV feedback. And so I think that's one example of, from a policy level, interest and looking at different ways of recognising people and expertise and what we value in our research systems. So I'm quietly hopeful that that these kind of reward systems will be changing.
Are there more questions from the audience? Janet, kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you very much for this presentation. And one thing it's given me is a word for what I think we do here. It's a really lovely word that captures many different nuances and concepts that are embedded in the Centre for Sustainability here. And that made me think, do you have space for kind of like hangers on or
always? Janet, we don't have hangers on, we just open the door a bit wider.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know how this is structured, but I think there's a natural affinity here, and it would be nice to further that.
I'm really glad to hear that. Yeah, I think just the eco is very much an open community.
Yeah,
so
we've been really lucky. I mean, Hitowa's been involved, came and jumped on the waka, and yeah, no, I think it is really, we really value people bringing their own experience, skills, their views. I mean, no one person can actually hold everything. So I think we are much stronger as a collective, and it goes back to your point as well that, none of us fit into boxes, and so we all have these different insights, and that's how we grow, and we grow together. So it's fantastic. Yeah, always room.
I have a question about the reward system. I find it a bit funny that, because the reward system, as I understand, is promotions, grants, those kind of things, or maybe got that wrong.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, but trying to, let's say, do good work or good science or be good, like the idea is like you have to be kind of network. Aren't we appeasing or valuing an extrinsic motivation rather than just being an intrinsic value? Aren't you already using a power structure that already set up by, let's say, existing structures?
So Ashlyn, do you want to repeat the question? So you're asking whether we're supporting extrinsic motivations?
Yeah, because if you're saying, okay, there needs to be change in the reward system, then you're appeasing, okay, the reward system is good, it just needs to adapt to different kinds of things. But the way I say, if I want to do good, the external motivation is not the reason I'm doing good. It's something that should come from within. If I'm doing good because I get money for it, it's not necessarily good. It is good, but is that the value that you want to start with?
So I think
Kind of repeat the question for people on Zoom. Just
yeah. So I think asking whether because this kind of, let's say, kindness or these kind of values should come from within rather than being externally motivated, for example, by promotion and the rewarding of grants. So I guess will changing the reward system really make a difference to whether kindness is practiced, or does it really matter? Is that what you're asking?
Or does the whole system needs to be changed in a way where promotion is not the reward? The reward is something else.
Yeah.
Because the way we are sticking with the same reward system, we are still trying to fit it within a system which is built for something else. It's not necessarily changing the system, we are adapting a part of the system itself.
So this sounds almost like a question of, can we adapt the current system, or should we be rebuilding a different system?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, gosh, that's a good question. Tammy or Ashlyn?
That's a very good question. I think part of when we talk about the rewards, you can think about them as rewards or as drivers, and just trying to think a little bit about what we currently have. So one of the analogies that I've used in the past, if we think about it as a funding pool, we can think about it as lots of pools, is that currently we have a system that rewards a certain type of behavior in terms of whether we call that an empire builder or whatever we happen to call that, where researchers on those teams learn that this is how we have to behave in order to be rewarded in this system. And then we have a small kind of sliver of people like, well, actually, if we're thinking about the best outcomes, we're looking beyond our own expertise, we're looking to collaborate, we're thinking about transdisciplinary research. And we might struggle in that space because the current structures don't reward those things or don't see those things as being valuable. And so I think it's both. I don't think it's a yes and. I think it's a little bit going back to Scylla's comments around being inherent about what we value and what our values are. And fundamentally, if you have individuals who are self-interested and uninterested in different ways of thinking and doing, honestly, I think we're going to waste a lot of time and a lot of energy trying to convince them otherwise. Personally, what I think about is the people around them who want to see and be a different way, and to have an opportunity for people to see that. Because I think, for example, when we had the first workshop back in 2017, a lot of the feedback that we got was like, oh, other people think this way too. And we find too, in terms of the Centers of Sustainability, you guys are already doing kindness in science. You just didn't call it that. When I first met Sean Handy and Kate Hanna, Te Pūnaha Matatini was already doing kindness in science. And so as far as being part of the collective, yes, please join us. And also we'd like to involve you in the research project for sure. I flagged that one earlier, Aisling, but I think it is a yes and. It's not and more than anything, I think what we really want is, by centering people and centering relationships, we will get the best outcomes. And surely that is one of our values, is to get the best possible outcome. And if we do that in a way that rewards collective behavior and provides opportunities so people can see themselves here, that we're doing something right. But we can't just do one, because we end up with perverse outcomes. If everything comes down from the bottom, then for example, you know, there's plenty that's been published in terms of the perverse outcomes that have come from Vision Mataranga, in terms of, you know, a number of Māori colleagues being, you know, called at the last minute to be put on a bid at 0.05 or finding out after the fact. And a lot of that is, if you do nothing about the system and just put in a new driver, it's not going to work. And so it's kind of a yes and I am wobbling too, I'm sorry. Kia ora.
Okay. Any last questions? We've got 5 more minutes. Caroline, have you got another question?
No.
Just
Yeah, this is great. I mean, it's been so interesting. I've been intrigued by the work you've been doing while you've been with us, Ashley. So it's been great to see the fruits of the labour. And obviously, it's an ongoing project, but really great to see the work going on. Thank you. Thank you.
And actually, you know, I'd just like to acknowledge too the people that aren't in the room, because of the way that we currently operate as a system. There are many people who don't see themselves here and for whom the door hasn't been open. And so I think if we can shift to a kinder system that opens the door for more people, then that's actually going to create change too. So just to acknowledge those people. Okay. Oh, well, thank you. Thank you both Aisling and Tammy for coming. It's been really lovely to see this presentation and to share this vision with you all. And thanks to all of our audience, both on Zoom and Kanohi Te Kanohi. Thank you for coming. And it'll be a great pleasure to talk about this more with all of you. So kia ora tātou.